A businessman believes his family is perfect until he witnesses an unexpected scene. His children demonstrate fear of their mother, but find safety in the arms of the nanny. Small signs begin to reveal a truth he never wanted to see. And this discovery completely changes everything he believed about his home. If this beautiful story of resilience and love interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you are watching us from. Continuing, Robert Miller would never have imagined that returning home early could completely change the way he viewed his own life. On that Thursday afternoon, in the heart of the Upper West Side in New York City, he left the office earlier than usual. The meeting with investors had been cancelled at the last minute, and for the first time in months, Robert had the opportunity to get home while the sun was still in the sky. Driving his black sedan through the tree-lined streets of the neighborhood, he felt a silent satisfaction. Perhaps he could catch the twins while they were still awake, play a bit with Luke and Lily before dinner. After all, lately he only saw them sleeping when he returned late at night and went discreetly up to their room to kiss their small foreheads. The house, imposing and well-kept, stood behind high gates and impeccable landscaping. Robert parked in the garage and entered through the side door, as he always did. Everything seemed in perfect order. The scent of lavender came from the entrance hall. The marble floors shone under the natural light streaming through the large windows, and the afternoon silence gave the residents an air of absolute tranquility. He dropped his briefcase on the sideboard and loosened his tie, ready to go up and look for the children. But before he could take the first step toward the stairs, a voice echoed from the second floor. It was the voice of Patricia, his wife, and she wasn't talking, she was screaming. Robert felt his entire body tense up. It wasn't common to hear Patricia lose her temper like that. She always maintained her composure, even in the most difficult situations. It was part of the image she cultivated so carefully, the elegant, controlled, impeccable wife. He climbed the stairs quickly, his heart accelerating with every step. When he reached the second-floor hallway, he saw the door to the children's room wide open. And it was there, at that moment, that Robert witnessed a scene he would never forget. Patricia was standing with her arms crossed and her face red with rage, pointing her finger toward Maya, the nanny they had hired just over 2 months ago. Maya, a young woman with serene features and a firm posture, was crouched on the floor with Luke and Lily clinging to her. The twins, only 3 years old, had their little faces hidden in the nanny's lap, and she held them with a protective delicacy that contrasted with the tension in the room. What caught Robert's attention most was not just the confrontation itself, but the way the children reacted. They didn't run to their mother. They didn't reach out for Patricia. On the contrary, they huddled even closer to Maya as if seeking refuge. Patricia, noticing her husband's presence, turned abruptly. Her face, usually composed, was overtaken by an expression of poorly disguised indignation. She didn't wait for Robert to ask anything. She began speaking immediately, her voice still loud, still charged with irritation. She said that Maya had crossed every line, that she was interfering in the children's upbringing, taking decisions without consulting anyone, and creating an inappropriate bond with the twins. According to Patricia, it was unacceptable. An employee could not act as if she were part of the family. She could not question the instructions she received, and much less could she make the children attach themselves to her that way. Robert listened, but something inside him couldn't completely accept that version of events. He looked at Maya, who remained silent, her eyes downcast, simply holding the children firmly. She didn't defend herself. She didn't snap back. She simply stayed there like a shield between the twins and the world around them. And then Robert did something that surprised even himself. Instead of immediately accepting Patricia's narrative, he asked for calm. He asked everyone to go downstairs, to talk more quietly. He suggested that Patricia go have some tea, and that he himself would speak with Maya and understand what had happened. His wife hesitated, clearly annoyed, but eventually agreed. Before leaving, however, she cast a cold glare at the nanny, a look that said much more than any word could. When Patricia went downstairs, silence took over the room. Robert approached slowly, observing the scene closely. Maya finally raised her face, and he noticed her eyes were moist, but she wasn't crying. There was a dignity in that look, a contained strength he hadn't expected to find. The twins, still clinging to her, began to calm down gradually. Lily let out a long sigh, and Luke loosened his grip on the nanny's arms. Robert knelt beside them and tried to understand what had happened. Maya, in a low and serene voice, explained that she was just trying to calm the children after a difficult episode. She didn't go into details. She didn't accuse anyone. She simply said they were scared, and she did what anyone would do. She comforted them. Robert felt a tightening in his chest. That simple answer, devoid of drama or elaborate justifications, sounded truer than everything Patricia had said minutes before. He looked at his children and realized something he had never noticed so clearly. They were different, lighter, more at ease. In Maya's arms, Luke and Lily didn't look like the quiet, distant children he saw every night. They looked like real children, spontaneous, secure, and that disconcerted him deeply. He thanked Maya and said she could return to her duties. She nodded, stood up carefully, and before leaving, gave a kiss to each child's forehead. They smiled at her. A genuine smile, the kind that comes from within. Robert was left alone in the room with the twins, feeling strangely out of place. He tried to play with them but realized he didn't know how. He didn't know what they liked. He didn't know which toys they preferred. He didn't know their routines, their fears, their joys. He had spent his whole life building an empire, ensuring his family had the best of everything. And suddenly he realized he didn't know his own children. Later, when he went down for dinner, Robert found Clara, the cook who had worked in the house for over 10 years. She was setting the table with that silent efficiency that had always characterized her. He took advantage of the moment and asked casually if everything had been all right with the children lately. Clara paused what she was doing. Her eyes revealed visible discomfort. She didn't answer immediately. She looked around, as if checking if anyone else was nearby, and then murmured that perhaps it would be better if he paid more attention to what happened during the day. Robert insisted, but she just shook her head and went back to work, clearly unwilling to expose herself. That reaction left Robert even more intrigued. He went back up to the second floor and found Marcus, the security guard who did the internal rounds of the house during the afternoon. Marcus was a discreet man of few words, but always attentive to everything. Robert pulled him to a corner and asked directly if he had noticed anything strange lately. Marcus hesitated. He looked away. But then, as if deciding he could no longer stay silent, he revealed that this wasn't the first time Maya had needed to protect the children. He said that in recent weeks, he had witnessed several situations where Patricia showed excessive impatience with the twins. Nothing severe enough to be called abuse, but enough to leave Luke and Lily visibly terrified. And always, in those moments, Maya appeared. She was always there, placing herself between the tension and the children, taking the responsibility, absorbing the pressure. Robert felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. How had he not noticed any of this? How had he been so blind? He thanked Marcus and asked him to keep it between them for now. He went back to his room, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process everything he had discovered in just a few hours. The perfect image he always had of his family was beginning to crack. And the more he thought, the more fissures appeared. Patricia, who always appeared so dedicated to the family's image, was actually distancing herself further and further from her children's reality. The constant trips to spas and social gatherings, the growing irritation with any noise coming from the children's room, the way she delegated absolutely everything to Maya. All of this, which Robert previously justified as tiredness or a need to care for herself, now took on a new meaning. And Maya, the nanny he barely knew, who had been hired almost without an interview because Patricia insisted they needed someone urgently, was revealing herself to be the only constant and genuine presence in Luke and Lily's lives. That night Robert couldn't sleep. He lay beside Patricia, who was snoring softly, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside him. He stared at the ceiling, mentally replaying every detail of the day. The scene in the room, the look in the twins' eyes, Maya's serenity, Clara's discomfort, Marcus's revelation. It all connected in a way he could no longer ignore. And for the first time in many years, Robert Miller, the successful businessman who always believed he was in control of everything, realized he had no control over what truly mattered. His home, which looked so perfect from the outside, hid secrets he hadn't even imagined existed. And worst of all, he had contributed to it, simply by choosing not to see. The days following that Thursday afternoon were the most restless of Robert Miller's life. For the first time in years, he began to pay attention to what was happening inside his own home. He cancelled meetings, reorganized commitments, and started arriving earlier, always with the excuse that he needed to review some documents in his home office. But the truth was different. He wanted to observe. He wanted to understand. He wanted to find out if what he had witnessed that afternoon was just an isolated episode or part of something much larger. On Friday morning, Robert left the house at the usual time but returned only 2 hours later, using the side entrance to avoid making noise. He went discreetly to the second floor and stopped in the hallway, from where he could hear what was happening in the children's room. The door was ajar. He recognized Maya's voice, soft and patient, telling a story to the twins. Luke and Lily were laughing, asking questions, interrupting the narrative with excitement. It was a sound Robert didn't remember hearing before. His children, normally so contained and silent, seemed completely different, spontaneous, happy, alive. He stood there for a few minutes, just listening. Maya didn't just tell the story, she lived it with the children. She changed her voice for each character, made funny sounds, paused at the right moments to create suspense, and the twins responded to every stimulus with genuine enthusiasm. Robert felt a strange pang in his chest. It wasn't exactly jealousy. It was something deeper. It was the painful realization that someone else knew his children better than he did. And worse, that his children felt more at ease with a stranger than with their own father. When the story ended, Maya announced it was time for a snack. Robert went downstairs quickly before anyone saw him and went straight to the kitchen, where he found Clara preparing sandwiches and cutting fruit. He pulled out a chair and sat at the table, watching the cook work. Clara avoided looking directly at him, too concentrated on her tasks. Robert knew she had been uncomfortable since the conversation the night before. He needed to earn her trust if he wanted to discover the truth. He started lightly, asking about the house routine, praising the food, commenting on how everything always worked perfectly. Clara responded in monosyllables, still wary. But when Robert mentioned he had noticed how much happier Luke and Lily seemed lately, something in her expression changed. She stopped cutting the fruit and finally looked at him. There was sadness in that look. Sadness and relief at the same time. Clara pulled out a chair and sat in front of Robert. She said she was going to speak only once and then never touch the subject again. She told him that in the months before Maya arrived, the children lived in a constant silence. Patricia showed no patience with them. Any crying was a reason for irritation. Any mess generated harsh reprimands. The previous nannies didn't last long because they couldn't handle the pressure. Some left on their own. Others were dismissed by Patricia, always with some justification related to incompetence or insubordination. When Maya arrived, everything changed. She wasn't intimidated. She didn't back down. She simply took over the care of the children with a naturalness that disarmed any tension. And the twins, who had learned to be quiet so as not to bother anyone, became real children again. Robert listened to everything in silence, feeling the weight of every word. Clara finished by saying that Maya wasn't just a nanny. She was the only person in that house who truly saw Luke and Lily as human beings, not as obligations or accessories to a perfect life. She said that and went back to work, making it clear the conversation was over. Robert whispered a thank you and left the kitchen with his mind racing. During the weekend, he decided to stay home. Patricia found it strange, as he always took advantage of Saturdays to play golf with partners or resolve pending issues at the office. But Robert insisted he wanted to spend more time with the family. Patricia smiled in that rehearsed way she used when she wanted to appear satisfied and said she thought it was a wonderful idea. She suggested they take the opportunity to take the kids to the club to show they were a united and present family. Robert agreed, but asked that before that they could have a quiet morning at home, just the four of them. Patricia's reaction was revealing. She hesitated. She invented that she had an important commitment with a friend. Then she changed her mind and said she actually needed to go to the salon. Finally, she agreed to stay, but made it clear she couldn't dedicate the whole day because she had other things to do. Robert didn't insist. He just observed, and he realized that his wife was doing everything she could to avoid genuine interaction with her own children. On Saturday morning, Maya wasn't there. It was her day off. Robert went down to the twins' room and found Patricia trying to get them to eat breakfast. Luke was sulking, refusing to eat. Lily was whimpering, asking to see Maya. Patricia, visibly irritated, was insisting they stop the tantrum and behave. The more she pressured them, the more the children resisted. The tension in the room was almost palpable. Robert entered the room and excused himself. Patricia stepped away immediately, relieved to be able to delegate the situation. He knelt in front of his children and, for the first time, truly tried to talk to them. He asked what they were feeling. Luke, with teary eyes, said he wanted Maya. Lily repeated the same thing, clinging to her father's arm. Robert felt his heart tighten. He explained calmly that Maya was resting, but she would be back soon. He asked if they wanted to do something special with him that day. Luke thought for a moment and said he wanted to play with Play-Doh. Lily agreed, excited. Robert had no idea where the Play-Doh was. Patricia, who was watching from afar with her arms crossed, dryly informed him that everything was in the toy room closet, organized by Maya. Robert went up with the children and opened the closet. He was impressed. Everything was categorized, labeled, and arranged so that even a small child could find what they wanted. There were drawings taped to the boxes indicating the contents. There was a color system. There was care in every detail. That wasn't the work of someone just doing a job. It was the work of someone who truly cared. They spent the morning playing. Robert, clumsy at first, gradually let loose. Luke showed him how to make snakes with the Play-Doh. Lily taught her father how to make flowers. They laughed together. They made a mess. And Robert realized that this was one of the most genuine moments he had lived in a long time. There were no meetings, no targets, no pressure. Just him and his children, connected in a simple and true way. Patricia appeared at the toy room door and announced she needed to leave. She had forgotten she had scheduled an important lunch and couldn't cancel. Robert looked at her, incredulous. It was Saturday. He had explicitly asked that they spend the day together. But Patricia already had her bag on her shoulder, ready to go. She leaned down quickly, gave a mechanical kiss to each child's forehead, and left without looking back. The twins didn't even react. They continued playing as if nothing had happened, and that was when Robert understood the scale of the problem. His children had already grown accustomed to their mother's absence. They no longer expected anything from her. At night, when Maya returned from her day off, Robert was in the living room reading when he heard the front door open. He heard her light steps going up the stairs, and then, coming from the second floor, he heard the twins' screams of joy. Luke and Lily ran down, tripping over their own feet, and threw themselves into Maya's arms. She hugged them with that welcoming way that had already become familiar. She asked if they had behaved, if they had eaten well, if they had missed her. They spoke all at once, telling her about the day, the Play-Doh, their father playing with them. Maya looked up and saw Robert standing at the living room door, watching the scene. She was visibly embarrassed, as if she had been caught doing something wrong. She tried to step away from the children, but they wouldn't let go. Robert approached, and for the first time truly looked at Maya. He really looked. He saw beyond the employee. He saw the woman. He saw the genuine kindness in those eyes. He saw the dedication in every gesture, and he felt a deep gratitude for her being there. He thanked Maya for taking such good care of his children. She, still bashful, said she was just doing her job. But Robert shook his head. It wasn't just a job. He knew that now, and he told her so. Maya was surprised. She wasn't used to receiving recognition. She murmured a quiet thank you and took the children to their bath, ending that moment before it became too heavy. Robert returned to the living room, but he could no longer concentrate on his reading. He kept thinking about everything he had discovered in those few days. His wife, whom he always believed to be a dedicated mother, was actually avoiding her children. His children, whom he thought were naturally quiet, had actually learned to be silent so as not to bother anyone. And Maya, the nanny he barely knew, was doing much more than expected. She was filling a void he didn't even know existed. When Patricia arrived, it was past 11 at night. She came in swaying slightly, her breath smelling of wine and her face flushed. She said the lunch had stretched out, that she had met other friends, that she had lost track of time. Robert said nothing. He just watched as she went up to the bedroom, without even asking how the children's day had been, and in that silence, he made a decision. He was going to find out everything, absolutely everything, because now it was clear that the life he believed he had was just a carefully constructed illusion. And he could no longer pretend he didn't see. The following week brought revelations that Robert never imagined he would face. He had decided he could no longer trust only casual observations or fragmented accounts. He needed concrete facts, and for that, he made a decision he never thought he would make. He began to discreetly check Patricia's credit card statements, her schedules, the commitments she claimed to have. What he discovered was much worse than any initial suspicion. The lunches with friends that stretched into the night were actually meetings at luxury spas, endless aesthetic sessions, shopping at expensive boutiques on Madison Avenue. The weekend trips she said were for wellness retreats, were stays at resorts, where there was no program other than individual relaxation. Patricia wasn't building a rich social life or attending to important commitments. She was simply running away, running from the house, running from the children, running from the responsibility of being a mother. Robert found receipts for aesthetic treatments, scheduled for times when she was supposed to be taking the twins to the pediatrician. He saw charges from sophisticated restaurants on days she claimed to have a migraine, locked in her room. He discovered that many of the trips she took alone were justified with elaborate lies about charity events or family commitments that never existed. Each discovery was like a stab, not because of financial betrayal, after all, money was never the problem for Robert, but because of the coldness, the indifference, the absolute disregard for everything that truly mattered. On a Tuesday afternoon, Robert arrived home and found Luke crying in the second-floor hallway. The boy was sitting on the floor, curled up, his face red and his eyes swollen. Robert knelt immediately beside him and asked what had happened. Luke, between sobs, said his mother had yelled at him because he spilled juice on his new clothes. He said she called him clumsy, careless, that he never paid attention to anything. The boy repeated the words with painful precision, as if they were etched in his memory. Robert felt rage rise in his throat. He asked where Patricia was. Luke pointed to the master bedroom. Robert asked his son to stay there, that he would be right back, and walked determinedly down the hall. He opened the bedroom door without knocking. Patricia was sitting on the bed looking at her phone, completely calm, as if nothing had happened. She looked up, surprised by her husband's abrupt entrance, and asked what was wrong. Robert took a deep breath, trying to control his tone. He asked if she had yelled at Luke. Patricia rolled her eyes and said the boy was exaggerating, that she had only reprimanded him because he had just put on clean clothes and had already made a mess. She said Robert didn't understand how exhausting it was to deal with two small children all the time, that she needed to set boundaries, that she couldn't let them do whatever they wanted. She said all this with a tone of boredom, as if she were explaining something obvious to someone who didn't understand reality. Robert felt something snap inside him. He said with forced calm that Luke was 3 years old, that 3-year-olds spill things, that it was normal, that yelling solved nothing, only scared him. Patricia interrupted him, irritated, saying he had no right to give lessons on parenting, since he spent the whole day out, and had no idea what it was like to take care of them in practice. Robert replied that perhaps she didn't know either, since the one who truly cared for the twins was Maya. The silence that followed was heavy. Patricia was paralyzed for a moment, processing the accusation. Then her face closed completely. She got up from the bed, put her phone in her bag, and said she wasn't going to stay there listening to insults. That if Robert thought Maya was so wonderful, then he should let her take care of everything, since, apparently, that's what he wanted. She left the room, slamming the door, went down the stairs, and left the house without looking back. Robert stood in the middle of the room trying to process what had just happened. That wasn't an ordinary couple's argument. It was a rupture. He went downstairs slowly and found Maya in the hallway, holding Luke in her arms. The boy had stopped crying and was now leaning on her shoulder, his thumb in his mouth, seeking comfort. Lily was beside them, holding Maya's free hand, watching everything with wide, worried eyes. Maya looked at Robert, and he saw something different in that look. It wasn't pity, it was understanding, as if she knew exactly what he was going through. She said nothing. She just made a soft gesture with her head, indicating she would take the children to their room. Robert nodded and stood there in the middle of the empty living room, listening to their footsteps fading away. Later, when the twins were already asleep, Robert went up to their room and watched through the crack in the door. Maya was sitting in the rocking chair between the two beds, reading a book by the light of the lamp. Every now and then, she raised her eyes to check if Luke and Lily were well covered, if they were breathing peacefully. There was a tenderness in those gestures that went far beyond professional duty. Robert knocked lightly on the door. Maya was startled, but stood up slowly so as not to wake the children and came out into the hallway. For the first time, the two were face to face, alone, without the presence of the twins or anyone else. Robert didn't quite know how to start. He thanked her for calming Luke down. Maya gave a sad smile and said he didn't need to thank her, that it was part of her job. But Robert shook his head. It wasn't a job. They both knew that. Maya lowered her eyes, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Robert asked how long she had been working as a nanny. Maya hesitated, but replied that she had been doing it for 5 years. Before that, she had been an early childhood teacher. Robert asked why she had changed professions. Maya was silent for a long moment. When she finally answered, her voice was heavy with contained emotion. She said she had gone through some difficult situations in life and needed to start over. Working as a nanny allowed her to have more flexibility and at the same time continue doing what she loved, taking care of children. Robert realized there was much more behind that simple answer. He wanted to ask more but felt it would be invasive. Maya seemed to guess his thoughts and, in an impulse that surprised even herself, began to tell him. She said she had been married, that the relationship ended painfully, that for a time she had lost herself completely, not knowing who she was or what she wanted. It was working with children that she found a purpose again. It was taking care of other people's children that she managed to rebuild herself. Robert listened to everything carefully. There was a genuine vulnerability in that account that touched him deeply. He thanked her for sharing that. Maya smiled, still a bit bashful, and said she should go rest. Robert agreed, but before she could step away, he lightly held her arm. He said he wanted her to know that he saw how much she dedicated herself to Luke and Lily, that he was grateful for it, that she wasn't just an employee in that house. She was someone essential. Maya was clearly moved. Her eyes shone, but she didn't let the tears fall. She just nodded, murmured an almost inaudible thank you, and walked away down the hall, leaving Robert alone with his thoughts. That night, Patricia didn't come home. Robert received a short text from her saying she was at a friend's house, that she needed time. He didn't reply. He lay in the empty bed, staring at the ceiling, rethinking everything. His life, his choices, his priorities. He had built a financial empire but let his home crumble. He had ensured his children had everything except what they truly needed: presence, attention, genuine love. And Maya. Maya was there, filling all the voids he and Patricia had created, not out of obligation, but out of a natural empathy that seemed to be part of who she was. Robert caught himself thinking about her in a different way, not just as the children's nanny, but as a person, a woman, someone who, just like him, was trying to rebuild something that had been broken. He pushed those thoughts away quickly. It wasn't the time, it wasn't appropriate. His life was falling apart and he needed to focus on what truly mattered: protecting Luke and Lily, ensuring they weren't hurt anymore, ensuring they had what they deserved. And if that meant facing Patricia, facing the truth about a marriage that no longer existed, then that's what he would do. The next morning, Robert woke up early and went down to the kitchen. He found Clara preparing coffee and asked if Maya was already awake. Clara said yes, that she always woke up before 6 to organize everything before the twins got up. Robert went up and knocked on the door of the nanny's suite. She opened it, still in her robe, surprised by the visit. Robert was direct. He said he needed to talk to her about something important. He asked that when she had time they could sit and talk calmly. Maya agreed, visibly apprehensive. They agreed to talk at night, after the children were asleep. Robert went back down, feeling the weight of the decision he was about to make. He didn't know exactly how that conversation would go yet, but he knew it had to happen, because now it was clear he could no longer pretend. He could no longer live in that lie. And Maya, whether she wanted to be or not, was at the center of everything that was happening, not as the culprit, but as the only person who had seen the truth from the beginning. The conversation Robert and Maya had that night changed everything. After the twins were asleep, he went down to the living room and asked her to sit. Maya was visibly nervous, her hands interlaced in her lap, waiting. Robert began by thanking her for the sincerity she had shown the night before in sharing a bit of her story. He said it had made him reflect a lot on his own life, his choices, and everything he had failed to see. Then, for the first time, Robert opened up completely. He told her about the discoveries he had made in recent days. Patricia's lies, the emotional neglect of the children, the constant flight from any real responsibility. He said his marriage had been over for a long time, but he had refused to see it. He was so busy building professional success that he let his family fall apart without realizing it. And now he was facing a truth he could no longer deny. Patricia didn't want to be there. She never truly did. Maya listened to everything in silence, her eyes moist. When Robert finished, she took a deep breath and said something that surprised him. She said she always knew there was something wrong in that house. From the very first day, when she was interviewed for the position. Patricia barely looked at her during the interview. She asked quick, superficial questions and hired Maya almost immediately, as if she were desperate to delegate that responsibility to anyone. In the first few days of work, Maya realized the twins were terrified children, used to walking on eggshells, not making noise, not bothering anyone, and it broke her heart. Maya confessed she had thought about leaving several times, that she couldn't stand seeing those small children living with so much fear. But every time she thought about going away, she looked at Luke and Lily and knew she couldn't abandon them. So she stayed, even when Patricia humiliated her, even when she was accused of overstepping boundaries. She stayed because those children needed someone, and if she wasn't there, who would be? Robert felt a lump in his throat. He apologized for not seeing, for not protecting his children, for letting everything reach that point. Maya shook her head and said he didn't need to apologize to her, that the important thing was that now he was seeing, that now he was there, and that made all the difference. At that moment, Robert made a decision. He told Maya he was going to separate from Patricia, that he could no longer continue in a marriage that was just a facade, but that he needed her help. He needed her to stay, not just as a nanny, but as part of the reconstruction of that family. Maya was silent for a long time, processing. Finally, she agreed. She said she would stay for as long as necessary, for the twins, and, although she didn't say it out loud, also for him. The following days were intense. Robert sought a lawyer and began the divorce process. Patricia, when informed, showed no surprise. In fact, she seemed almost relieved. She said she had also been thinking about it for some time, that the marriage no longer made sense for either of them. The only thing she demanded was a fair financial division and the guarantee that she wouldn't be exposed publicly. Robert agreed to everything. He didn't want fights. He didn't want scandals. He just wanted to end that cycle as smoothly as possible. Patricia left the house on a Saturday morning, taking only her personal belongings. The twins were in the toy room with Maya when she left. She didn't say goodbye to them. She didn't ask to see them one last time. She simply grabbed her suitcases, got in the car, and drove away. Robert watched from the window, feeling a mix of sadness and relief. Sadness for what could have been and never was. Relief for finally being free from that lie. When he went back inside the house, he found Maya at the toy room door, watching him with an expression that was hard to decipher. She asked if he was all right. Robert nodded, but he knew he wasn't being completely honest. He wasn't all right. He was confused, hurt, lost, but at the same time he felt he was finally on the right path. The house began to change in the following days, not physically but energetically. There was a lightness in the air that wasn't there before. The twins, who were always quiet and contained, began to let loose. They laughed louder. They ran through the hallways. They asked questions without fear of being reprimanded. And Robert, for the first time, was truly present. He had lunch with them. He played in the late afternoon. He participated in the bath routine and bedtime. Maya watched everything with a discreet smile. She was teaching Robert how to be a real father. She showed him how to make Luke laugh during dinner, She taught him the right way to comb Lily's hair without hurting her. She explained the little rituals the children had created that gave them security, and Robert absorbed it all with a humility that surprised even himself. He, who had always been the man with the answers, was now the man with the questions, and Maya had patience for all of them. The conversations between the two began to extend beyond what was necessary. After the children slept, they met in the living room, sometimes just to talk about the day, sometimes to share stories from the past. Robert told her about his humble childhood in a small town in Pennsylvania, how he struggled to build everything from scratch, about the constant fear of losing everything and returning to poverty. Maya told him about her simple family in Albany, about her dream of being a teacher, about the marriage that ended when she discovered her husband had a parallel life she knew nothing about. There was a growing intimacy in those conversations, a connection that went beyond the rational. Robert began to notice details in Maya that had previously gone unnoticed, the way she bit her lower lip when she was thoughtful, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about the children, the low, genuine laugh that escaped when he told a funny story. And Maya, in turn, began to see Robert not as the distant boss, but as the vulnerable man hiding behind the armor of success. On a Thursday night, after a particularly exhausting week, Robert went down to get water and found Maya sitting on the back porch, looking at the lit-up garden. She seemed lost in thought. He asked if he could keep her company. Maya nodded, making space on the wooden bench. They sat there side by side in silence, just listening to the sounds of the night. It was Maya who broke the silence. She said she had to confess something. Robert turned to her, worried. Maya took a deep breath and said she was scared. Scared of overstepping boundaries, scared of becoming too emotionally involved. She said their relationship had changed, that it was no longer just professional and she didn't know if it was appropriate, that she didn't want to be misinterpreted, that she didn't want him to think she had ulterior motives. Robert was silent for a moment, processing. Then, with an honesty that surprised them both, he said he felt the same, that he was also confused, that he no longer knew where gratitude ended and something else began. But that, above all, he trusted her, and that if she wanted to step back to establish clearer boundaries, he would completely understand. Maya looked at him, her eyes shining under the soft porch light. She said she didn't want to step back, that for the first time in a long time, she felt she was exactly where she was supposed to be. But she was also afraid of getting hurt again, afraid of being just a transition phase in his life, afraid that when everything calmed down, he would realize she was just an employee who confused gratitude with affection. Robert held her hand. It was an instinctive gesture, almost involuntary. He said she was never just an employee, that it was impossible to look at everything she had done for his children and not feel something deep. But he understood her fear. He was also scared. His life was upside down and he didn't want to make hasty decisions that could hurt someone he had come to admire so much. They stayed like that for a while, holding hands, saying nothing more. It wasn't a declaration, it wasn't a commitment, it was just a recognition. The recognition that something was being born between them, something delicate and uncertain, but real, and that they needed to be careful, for the twins, for themselves, for everything that was still being rebuilt. When they finally stood up to go back inside, Maya slowly let go of his hand, as if she needed that gesture to re-establish some kind of boundary. Robert understood. He said goodnight and went up to his room, carrying with him the feeling that something had changed irreversibly that night, and that regardless of what happened from then on, he would never be the same man he was before truly knowing Maya. In his room, lying in the darkness, Robert thought about everything. The wife who left without looking back, the children who were finally happy, the woman who had transformed his house into a real home, and he wondered if it was possible to rebuild a life on the rubble of another, if it was possible to find true love in the most unlikely place, if it was possible that, in the midst of so much pain and confusion, something genuinely good could flourish. He didn't have answers, but for the first time in a long time he had hope. 3 weeks after the separation, just as Robert was beginning to believe he had finally found some balance, Patricia reappeared. Not in the explosive and emotional way he would have expected, but in a calculated and controlled manner. She called on a Monday morning, her voice serene, almost sweet, asking to talk. She said she had gone through a process of deep reflection, that she was in therapy, that she had understood her mistakes, and wanted to try to rebuild her relationship with the children. She didn't mention the marriage. She didn't ask to come back. She just said she wanted to be a real mother, that the twins deserved it. Robert was suspicious. He knew Patricia long enough to know when she was being genuine and when she was acting. But at the same time, he couldn't deny his children the possibility of having a present mother. As much as everything had improved, Luke and Lily still asked for her sometimes. They still held a childish hope that maybe one day their mother would come back different. So Robert agreed. They scheduled it for the following Saturday. She would come for lunch and spend the afternoon with the children. Maya was visibly apprehensive when she heard the news. She asked if Robert was sure it was a good idea. He wasn't sure either, but he said he had to give her that chance, for the twins. Maya agreed, but Robert noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way she avoided looking directly at him when they talked about Patricia. There was fear there. Fear that things would go back to the way they were. Fear that she would lose the place she had earned in that family. On Saturday, Patricia arrived punctually. She was impeccable, as always. Her hair was done, light makeup, elegant but discreet clothes. She brought gifts for the twins, wrapped in colorful paper. When she entered the house, she looked around as if visiting for the first time. Everything looked the same, but at the same time completely different. There were toys scattered in the living room, children's drawings taped to the fridge, an organized mess that showed real people lived there, not just a magazine family. Luke and Lily came down the stairs holding Maya's hands. When they saw their mother, they hesitated. They didn't run to hug her. They stood still, watching, waiting. Patricia broke into a wide smile and knelt, extending her arms. The children looked at Maya, seeking approval. She nodded softly, encouraging them. Only then did the twins walk slowly toward Patricia and accept her hug. It was a mechanical hug, without the spontaneity they had with Maya. But it was a start. Robert watched everything from the living room door. He saw the look Patricia cast at Maya. It wasn't a hostile look, but there was something in it. Something calculated, as if she were evaluating, measuring, planning. Maya, for her part, remained serene. She said she was going to prepare lunch and retreated to the kitchen. Patricia asked if the nanny was still living there. Robert confirmed. Patricia just nodded without making comments, but Robert noticed the tension in that gesture. Lunch was awkward. Patricia was excessively animated, asking questions about school, favorite toys, everything, but the children responded in monosyllables, without the excitement they showed when talking to their father or Maya. There was a distance there, an invisible wall Patricia was trying to tear down with visible effort, but without real success. Maya served the food and went back to the kitchen, keeping her distance. Robert realized she was withdrawing on purpose, trying to give Patricia space. After lunch, Patricia suggested playing with the twins in the garden. Robert agreed and watched from the porch. At first, it seemed to be going well. Patricia tried to participate in the games, pushed Lily on the swing, ran after Luke. But gradually, tiredness began to show. She stopped participating actively and began just observing, checking her phone every now and then. The children, without her attention, went back to playing by themselves, already used to that dynamic. That was when Luke fell. He tripped over a stone and scraped his knee. He began to cry loudly. Patricia stood up quickly, but before she could reach him, Maya appeared running out of nowhere. She knelt beside the boy, examined the wound, whispered reassuring words, and lifted him into her arms carefully. Luke stopped crying almost immediately, leaning his head on her shoulder. Lily came running too, grabbing Maya's leg, seeking the safety only she seemed to offer. Patricia stood still, watching the scene. Her face, previously controlled, began to show signs of irritation. She approached and said she could take care of her son, that Maya didn't need to interfere. Maya, still holding Luke, looked at Patricia and said calmly that she was just helping, that the boy got hurt and she responded by instinct. Patricia insisted, with a firmer voice, that she could take him inside and care for him. Maya hesitated, looked at Robert watching from the porch, and finally handed Luke to Patricia. The boy began to whimper again, reaching out for Maya. Patricia tried to calm him, but he only cried louder, calling for the nanny. Lily also began to cry, calling for Maya. The situation quickly spiraled out of control. Patricia, visibly frustrated, raised her voice asking the children to calm down. That only made everything worse. The twins became desperate, screaming and crying. It was Robert who intervened. He stepped down from the porch quickly and took Luke in his arms. He asked Maya to take Lily inside and put a bandage on the boy's knee. Maya obeyed promptly, relieved to be able to help. Patricia stood there in the middle of the garden, with her fists clenched and her face red. When the children were out of sight, she exploded. She accused Robert of having turned Maya into the mother of their children. She said the children no longer recognized her, that they had been manipulated to reject her, that all of it was his fault for allowing a stranger to take her place. Robert tried to remain calm and explained that Maya hadn't taken anyone's place, that she had filled a void that already existed long before the separation, that the children attached themselves to her because she was present when no one else was. Patricia didn't want to hear it. She said she would seek her rights, consult lawyers, that she wouldn't allow her children to be raised by a servant. She used that word with disdain, as if Maya were inferior, replaceable. Robert felt rage rising, but controlled himself. He said Maya was much more than a servant, that she was the person who had saved his children from the emotional abandonment they suffered for years, that if anyone should feel ashamed there, it wasn't Maya. Patricia was silent for a moment, processing. Then she completely changed her posture. The rage gave way to a calculated coldness. She said she understood now what was happening, that it wasn't just about the children, that there was something between Robert and Maya. She asked with a cynical smile how long it had taken for him to replace her, if it had started before or after the separation. Robert denied it vehemently. He said there was nothing inappropriate happening, that Maya was a dedicated professional, and that Patricia was distorting everything because she couldn't accept that she had failed as a mother. Patricia gave a bitter laugh and said he could try to deceive himself, but she knew enough about men to know when there was interest, and that now she understood why he had accepted the separation so easily. He already had a replacement ready. Robert asked her to leave. He said that visit had been a mistake, and that perhaps it would be better to establish a more structured schedule for future times, with less spontaneity and more preparation. Patricia agreed, but before leaving, she made sure to say that this wasn't over, that she would fight for her children, that she would consult lawyers and, if necessary, expose everything that was happening in that house. She left, slamming the door, leaving Robert alone in the garden. He stayed there for a few minutes, trying to compose himself. When he went back inside, he found Maya in the living room, sitting on the sofa with the twins beside her. Luke had a bandaged knee and was eating a popsicle. Lily had another popsicle in her hand and was drawing in a notebook. Both were calm as if nothing had happened. Maya looked at Robert and he saw worry in that look. She asked quietly if everything was all right. Robert nodded, but he knew it wasn't. Patricia was right about one thing. There was indeed something between him and Maya, something that went beyond gratitude, beyond professional admiration. Something he wasn't yet ready to name, but that was there, growing, becoming increasingly impossible to ignore. And now Patricia knew, and she was going to use it against them. That night, after the children were asleep, Robert told Maya everything. Patricia's accusations, the threats, the insinuation about their relationship. Maya listened with her face growing paler. When he finished, she said that perhaps it would be better if she left, that she didn't want to be a source of conflict, that she didn't want to jeopardize Robert in a potential custody dispute. Robert felt panic take hold of him. He asked her not to make hasty decisions, that they needed to think calmly. Maya shook her head and said she had already thought a lot, that she had known, since that conversation on the porch, that this could happen, that she was afraid of exactly this, that her emotional involvement with that family would become a problem. Robert held her hands. He said she wasn't a problem. She was the solution, that without her none of this would have been possible, that the twins needed her, that he needed her. Maya looked at him with eyes full of tears and asked what they were going to do. Robert had no answer. He only knew he couldn't let her go, not now, not ever. They stayed like that, holding hands in the middle of uncertainty, knowing a storm was brewing and that they would need to face it together. Because now it wasn't just about Luke and Lily. It was about the four of them, about the family that, without planning and without warning, had been born in the rubble of the previous one, and that now needed to fight to survive. The following weeks were the most difficult. Patricia kept her word and filed a legal action for custody revision. She claimed Robert was exposing the children to an inappropriate situation by keeping an employee living in the house, creating confusion over family roles and harming the twins' emotional development. She hired an aggressive lawyer who began asking invasive questions about the house routine, the relationship between Robert and Maya, about everything. Maya, as she had predicted, was exposed to cruel judgments. There were insinuations about her intentions, her character, her goals in staying in that house. She had to give a deposition, answer embarrassing questions, defend her integrity before strangers who looked at her with suspicion. And through all of it, she maintained her dignity. She answered with honesty, without playing the victim, without attacking Patricia, just telling the facts as they were. Robert was also extensively interrogated. They asked about his absence during the children's first years of life, about when he began to notice the problems in the marriage, about his relationship with Maya. He answered everything with transparency. Yes, he had failed as a father. Yes, he had been away too much, but he had also recognized his mistakes and was trying to correct them. And yes, he had deep admiration and gratitude for Maya, but there was nothing inappropriate between them. Yet. The word yet hung suspended in the air during the deposition. Patricia's lawyer immediately seized on it, suggesting Robert was admitting to future intentions. Robert didn't back down. He said he couldn't predict the future, but at that moment his priority was ensuring his children were well, and that Maya was essential for that. The judge ordered a psychological evaluation of the twins. A child psychologist spent several sessions with Luke and Lily, observing how they interacted with each adult in their lives. She asked careful questions about how they felt, what they liked, who they felt safe with. The children, with their innocent honesty, answered everything. When the day of the final hearing arrived, the tension was palpable. Robert was accompanied by his lawyer, Patricia by hers. Maya was present as a witness, sitting in the back benches, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. The judge entered, and everyone stood. The room went into absolute silence. The magistrate began speaking about the complexity of the case. He said he had seen many custody disputes throughout his career, but this one had particularities that required careful analysis. Then he asked for the psychologist's report. She entered, a middle-aged woman with a serene appearance carrying a folder of documents. The psychologist presented her findings. She said she had interviewed Luke and Lily in different contexts and situations, that she had observed their interactions with their father, their mother, and also with Maya, and that her findings were clear. The children showed a strong emotional bond with their father and with Maya. They responded with enthusiasm when talking about them. They appeared relaxed, spontaneous, and secure. When talking about their mother, however, there was hesitation. There was no hostility, but there was also no genuine connection. They seemed to be talking about someone they knew superficially. The psychologist continued, saying that in one of the sessions she asked the twins who took care of them when they were sad. Both immediately replied, Maya. She asked who helped them when they were afraid at night. Maya. Who played with them? Maya. Who comforted them when they cried? Maya. The repetition of the name left no doubt about who had assumed the maternal role in that family. Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Her lawyer tried to argue that this was the result of manipulation, of excessive forced cohabitation, but the psychologist denied it. She said children cannot be manipulated into feeling safety, that the bond Luke and Lily had with Maya was genuine, built through constant presence, real care, and true love. Then the judge did something unexpected. He asked to bring in the children. There was a murmur in the room. Usually such young children were not called to hearings, but the magistrate said he needed to see for himself. The twins entered holding hands, visibly nervous. A social worker accompanied them, but they looked everywhere searching for someone. When they saw Maya in the back benches, their little faces lit up. They tried to run to her, but the social worker gently held them back. The judge observed that reaction. Then he called Luke and Lily closer to him. He asked, in a soft voice, if they knew why they were there. Both shook their heads no. He explained in a simple way that he had to make a decision about where they would live and who they would spend more time with. Luke, with his 3.5 years, looked at the judge and said something that made the entire room fall silent. He said he wanted to live with Daddy and with Auntie Maya. Lily agreed, nodding vigorously. The judge asked about their mother. Luke thought for a moment and said his mother could visit, but that they wanted to stay with the person who truly took care of them. Patricia let out a sob. She covered her mouth with her hand, trying to contain her emotion. For the first time since everything had started, she seemed truly hit, not by the legal defeat, but by the rejection of her own children. A rejection she herself had built through years of emotional neglect. The judge dismissed the children with kindness. The social worker took them to a room next door. Then the magistrate began his decision. He said it was evident that Robert had fully assumed his parental responsibilities, that he had shown a genuine commitment to the children's well-being, that Maya's presence in the house, far from being harmful, was beneficial and even essential for the children's emotional stability. As for Patricia, the judge was direct but not cruel. He said she had the right to try to rebuild the bond with her children, but that this needed to happen gradually, with initial supervision, until the children felt safe with her. He determined that primary custody would stay with Robert. Patricia would have the right to regular visits, initially supervised, with the possibility of review after 6 months, depending on the evolution of the relationship with the children. The decision was made. Patricia stood up without saying anything and left the room. Her lawyer followed, trying to console her. Robert stood still, processing. He had won, but he felt no triumph. He felt only relief. And when he looked back and saw Maya with tears streaming down her face, he knew this was much bigger than a legal victory. It was the validation of everything she had done. It was the recognition that her love for the children was no less for not having come from blood. When they left the courthouse, Robert asked the lawyer to leave them alone for a moment. He took Maya to a bench outside where they sat in silence. She cried softly, wiping away tears with the back of her hand. Robert held her hand and said none of this would have been possible without her, that she had saved his children, that she had saved him too. Maya looked at him with red eyes and said she was afraid of what would come next, afraid that, with the dispute resolved, she would no longer be necessary. Robert shook his head and, for the first time, said out loud what he had been feeling for weeks. He said it was no longer about necessity. It was about choice, that he chose her, that he wanted to build something real beside her, if she also wanted it, but that he would respect any decision of hers, because everything she had done deserved respect above all else. Maya was silent for a long moment. Then, with a smile through the tears, she said she also chose. She chose that family. She chose those children. She chose him. Not because it was easy, but because it was true, and because, for the first time in a long time, she felt she was exactly where she was supposed to be. When they returned home, Luke and Lily were waiting for them with Clara. The children ran into the arms of both, without distinction, without hesitation. There, in that collective hug, was the purest truth. Family was not defined by formal roles or blood ties. Family was defined by presence, by care, by love shown every day in the small things. Robert looked around the living room, saw the children's drawings on the walls, the toys scattered, the organized mess Maya always maintained. He saw Clara smiling from the kitchen door, happy with the outcome. He saw the twins laughing, finally free from the weight of a dispute they never asked to be part of. And he saw Maya, the woman who arrived as an employee and became the heart of that home. Months later, on a Sunday afternoon, Robert organized a barbecue in the garden. He invited Clara, Marcus, and some close friends. Maya was beside him, helping to prepare the tables, while Luke and Lily played with other children on the lawn. Someone asked when the wedding would be. Robert and Maya exchanged a look and smiled. There was no rush. They were already a family in every way that mattered. Patricia had started her supervised visits and gradually was learning how to be a mother. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be fast. But she was trying, and that was already something. The children still preferred Maya, still ran to her first, but they were beginning to accept their biological mother's presence with less resistance. Perhaps one day they could have room for both in their lives. On that sunny afternoon, Robert realized he had finally understood what truly mattered. It wasn't the money he earned. It wasn't the big house or the material goods. It was this. It was being present. It was watching his children grow. It was having someone beside him who challenged him to be better every day. It was building real memories, not just a perfect facade. Maya, who had been humiliated for protecting, was now celebrated for loving. Robert, who had been blind for years, finally saw clearly. And Luke and Lily, who were born into a broken family, were now growing up in a family rebuilt with truth, with presence, and with genuine love. The story that began with a scene of conflict ended with a scene of peace, and everyone there knew that peace had been earned, not given. It had been built, brick by brick, through difficult choices, through the courage to face painful truths, and through a capacity to start over that only those who truly love can have. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Robert, Maya, Luke, and Lily touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of reconstruction, of true love, and of a family that is born where it is least expected, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most. Was it Robert's courage in recognizing his mistakes? Maya's strength in protecting the children, even while being judged? Or perhaps the moment when the twins showed where they truly felt safe? Every day, we bring intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, showing that starting over is possible and that true love is built with presence, not with words. We wait for you in the